Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And thank you for joining this learning experience brought to you by Harness. My name is Cody, and welcome back to Techstrong Learning. Before we dive into things, I've got just a couple of notes I'd like to review with everyone. First off, we are recording our session today. So if you happen to miss any of our discussion, if you'd like to watch again later, or of course, if you'd like to share this with your team, you will be receiving the recording via email shortly after we conclude this live session today. Now, if you'd like to get involved with our presentation, there are a couple of ways to do so. The first option is to use the chat tab on the right side of your screen. So when you find that chat tab, I'd like you to let us know from where in the world you are joining from today. Now, if you have specific questions, we do ask that you submit those questions to the Q&A panel on the right side of that chat section, as sending your questions to the Q&A just helps us keep track, and we want to do our best to answer as many of your questions as we can. Now, before we close out, or rather, after we close out, I will be selecting 2 of our most engaged attendees to win a $50 Amazon gift card. So ways to become eligible are to send in your chats, your questions, and of course, there will be a post-webinar survey at the end of the program that's also currently in the handout section. And since we mentioned the handout section, I'll also point out there are a bunch of additional resources there for you that Harness has provided. So jump over to the handout section for a couple of extra things. So our topic today is consolidation, consistency, visibility, and beyond. Intelliflo's journey with modern software delivery. I'm joined today by Marc Pearce, Head of DevOps at Intelliflo, and I'm also joined today by Martin Reynolds, Field CTO at Harness. So Marc and Martin, thank you both so much for joining us today on Techstrong Learning. Martin, would you like to dive us right into things?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks very much, Cody. So first of all, welcome to everyone. We really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today. And as introduced, I'm Martin Reynolds. I'm the Field CTO at Harness. And today we'll be talking to Marc, who I will get to introduce himself shortly, from Intelliflo, and talk about kind of his journey, an ongoing journey, I would say is the best way to describe it, because there's always something new on the horizon. But don't want to jump the gun. So Marc, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who Intelliflo are?
Sure. So, as you said, I'm Marc Pearce. I look after DevOps at Intelliflo. I've been with Intelliflo since 2019, mid-2019. Intelliflo is the UK's #1 choice for financial advisors in terms of a SaaS platform that provides them with a back office product. The business has been growing exponentially since I joined in 2019, and we've actually expanded across 3 regions now globally, and that journey is ongoing, as you can imagine. Now we've expanded that offering into those new territories.
Awesome, that's great. And so let's kind of roll back and to kind of the start of your journey. And why don't you kind of set the scene a little bit about where the software landscape was for you, and then really kind of if you could tell us what some of those challenges were that you encountered at the beginning of the process, and and what were the real things that were blocking you moving away from kind of legacy tooling and technology?
Yeah, sure. So when I joined in 2019, I was recruited with the aim to migrate our current platform to AWS. So as it was, so the UK platform out of the data center, lift and shift that up into AWS. Intelliflo was already using cloud services at that time, various queuing technologies, S3 in the background, but we still had a physical data center. We still had Windows hypervisors running .NET code. That's where we were when I joined. And actually, we even pivoted between me being interviewed and actually landing in the office. At one point, there were considerations around running on EC2 with Nomad, for example. And I started to research that. And then actually, when I landed in seat, the decision was then made to actually, let's go all in. Let's go over to EKS. And so that was going to be a quantum leap from where we were at that time. Using the current tooling to deploy on-prem into a data center, as I say, on top of Windows hosts, very, very different change that we were looking at. And so that was kind of my first challenge, I would say, is one of the first things I noticed. Like, okay, sure, we've got to port the applications. We need to containerize these applications. And luckily, we already begun the journey to microservices. So that was en route. And we could pick these up and begin that work. But obviously, then we still got to orchestrate them. We've still got to run the platform. We've still got to have credentials and security in the background, things like this. So it's, thinking, how are we going to greenfield this? Because nothing we currently had really was going to pass the test. So like I say, I remember coming in and that shift being quite sudden, because saying actually, no, we're going to Kubernetes, thinking, okay, this is going to be a completely different conversation now. Right the way from ingress down, everything was going to change. And so going from devices like hardware-based devices like F5s, etc., all the way over. So I think that was the first big thing to start thinking about how to orchestrate and bring all of this together for me, how we were going to coordinate this effort into the cloud. We had the app team start obviously on working on porting them. .NET, fairly straightforward to port, right? Not terrible. However, we did have some legacy net framework services that need to run on Windows, and so we were very lucky that at the end of 2019, Amazon had just sort of come out of the beta of Windows with an EKS, and so we were able to leverage that for those 4 or 5 microservices that needed legacy technology, legacy Windows technology. So we were lucky that timing was just right at that point. And so we targeted those. We started testing that out, and as I say, we started to then think about the orchestration side. How are we going to actually deploy these services? How are we going to roll this out? I went to reInvent at the end of 2019 and was looking at the various different offerings on the market at the time. And I remember coming back and carefully considering what we were going to do. Ironically, I think I might have spoken to Armory and Spinnaker first, and started to look at that. At that time, they didn't actually have a SaaS product. That was still a self-hosted deployment, and I was considering what that was going to look like for us if we had to deploy it again and manage it ourselves, much like we had been doing with Jenkins. And one of the other products I then looked at was a company called Harness, which in the UK, I think in 2019 was still relatively new, I would say, relatively new. Yeah. And I started to try out this product to see if that would be a good fit for us to essentially build out, I'll call it a very basic catalog of services, to bring it into that kind of SaaS portal, lay everything out that we've got and start coordinating both that migration effort and then the forward orchestration and deployment effort that we would need. And obviously that included all the infrastructure services as well to support the product. When I first tried Harness, I was really impressed just because of how easy it was to get up and running. I hadn't had a lot of Kubernetes experience at that time. The previous company I'd come from, I'd done an AWS migration, but again, we'd gone to EC2. So for me, it was still new. I was still feeling my way around it. And it was that probably swung me when I made that decision then to go with Harness. That was one of the things that swayed me, was just how easy it was. And I thought, if this is easy, we've got another 100 of these services to onboard here. How are we going to make this easy for us to do? It needs to be quick. And so, I started to lean more towards Harness in terms of my due diligence as I was going through the products, and and then eventually settled once I'd spoken to the team, looked at the documentation, which was pretty extensive even at that time. The documentation was good, and it's even better now with the developer hub. So that swayed me, and obviously we've gone a little bit full circle there with some recent announcements that have been made. It's been interesting that's kind of come full circle. But we landed in Harness, and what we then proceeded to do through COVID, which suddenly landed, on us in March 2020, we were all at home, and I actually think the product also helped us there because we were able to coordinate effort into that platform. And as I say, we were onboarding services, and anyone who's done a migration knows this is a very glorified checklist. You're trying to get through all these services that you need to migrate, you need to move, and you're working down them, and you're working through each one iteratively and until it completes. And we were able to build out our pipelines in Harness and begin that move away from Jenkins, which we'd had running on EC2. But anyone who's run Jenkins knows the struggles there. Everyone winces every time you want to patch it or do anything with it, the plugins.
I literally just had a natural reaction wince when you said that. Then I couldn't help it. It's ingrained after years of using it.
I think the thing is it worked in terms of deployment, and delivery. Like it was functional. It was functional. We were running some relatively good continuous delivery even to our on-prem stuff. It worked, but it certainly had its drawbacks, and it was fragile, and there was the few that could support it, and that includes both the pipelines themselves and also the underlying infrastructure. And obviously, we made that conscious shift away from that. We're a SaaS vendor anyway, so to me, it's natural to apply those principles when we look at a product. And so, when I looked at these and looked at who was playing this game in the SaaS area, like I said, this was the front runner, and we've been using that portal now for a good number of years, and we're just on our journey now to the next version of it. We've just pretty much completed that transition to Harness Next Gen, which has brought in a huge amount of benefit, I think, to us, and it's enabled us to, where we were working through that initial migration just to get to the cloud. That was our objective. We need to get to the cloud and get a pattern of the platform in the cloud so that it was repeatable for multiple regions. That was our goal, so that we could get the platform built in the cloud and then deploy to an AU region and a US region. And like when we built that out, we were kind of feeling our way through it, and we've been able to now look at that again and migrate it over into the next gen version and do a little bit of housekeeping and think, well, what worked on that first journey, or what didn't, and what can we clean up? And that's enabled us to begin already refining those pipelines in this I'd say the second big iteration, versus just that continual improvement. And we've been able to do that during that second phase of migration now. So like I said, that was 29 into 2020, through 20 into 21. We built out all our test environments. We cut over production in the middle of that year. So we cut our stack over in AWS, and we were able to then build out our other regions as well. We moved our backend database in 22. We had to wait for some silicon to arrive in Amazon, of which there was a great deal of shortage of during that period, and that cut over in 22. So it brought us in 22 to be completely cloud hosted. And I say cloud hosted versus native, because I think, while you're still running Windows EC2 instances in your environment, and you've got some dependencies on that, you're not, to me, fully cloud native. I'd like to see it, ported to all .NET and all Linux, just so that we had more choice of the platforms available to us, Fargate, etc. Just some more flexibility. Although support there is always changing as well. They're increasing it all the time. So yeah, that's kind of the initial journey that we went on to build out the platform in AWS. And obviously we've touched on Harness there. Why I hope that explains we went with Harness and how we used the tool initially to onboard us.
No, I think it's amazing. And it's a phenomenal journey, really. I mean, from where you started to where you got to, and and I'm picking some things out from what you were saying there, but specifically, that kind of consistency of patterns, if you like, your pathways to production that you seem to, that you've clearly built out, that you rely on, and gives you a go forward route. I think, that's an awesome progress from, I don't know if you realize when you say it, like how far those two things sound apart, like listening to you, it's like you come from here and suddenly you're all the way over here, and you know that you need to go further, which I think is all part and parcel of it. So, clearly you have those golden pathways, and you have standards about the things that you deploy. So, how are you kind of maintaining those standards and keeping high standards in that software delivery process to ensure that your platform stays up and it's resilient and that it is secure, and you're doing all those good things that you need to do to be able to be confident and go to sleep at night and not worry that somebody's going to get that page alert? How are you kind of enforcing that process?
That's definitely an ongoing journey at the moment, and something we're constantly striving to improve. I think, the whole observability piece, I think that's where we're going there as well, is talking about that observability piece. We've heard many vendors in the past talk of things like single pane of glass. Often I've not really found that tends to actually be the case. It doesn't actually bring everything together. You're always missing a glaring component in those scenarios or that product. But I think, in terms of trying to maintain code and some of those kind of SDLC type gating, and I mean, you might touch this earlier. We're using GitHub. We've got GitHub. We've got GitHub Advanced Security in the background there running. So we've got the Dependabot engine, things like that, and we've got various checks in actions running against PRs. And so that's helping us maintain it, I think, in terms of the code side. And obviously we can feed all that data up. We can analyze that data. That's on that left, on the left side of it. Obviously, once it is approved, once it's past the linter, once the vulnerabilities have been resolved, once the third-party library's been updated, it's going to find its way still into production, and it's going to be running. And then we have another challenge, obviously, of okay, so it's gone through maybe ECR or something like that. We've had scanning there, but it's now running in production. And what are the metrics and the data that we're getting off of it now in production of that particular service, for example? We've recently just moved from one big logging provider over to Grafana Loki. We've just recently made that shift, and the reason was twofold. We were already using Prometheus for metrics in the background there, so it made sense to bring everything into that Grafana dashboard, so we can bring that data together. And like I say, that's now really looking at the service operationally and how it's running. However, I still don't think that's the complete picture. And when I spoke to Harness about a year and a half ago, I think it is now, something like that, we were looking at how we can surface that data even better. I think sometimes Grafana dashboards and things can be overwhelming. There's a lot of metrics, a lot of data on there. People are not sure what they're looking at or how to cherry pick it, how to customize it. So it's a way to distill that down if you're not a super user. And we looked at the Harness reliability module, which does exactly that. And we partnered with you on the feature to get Loki in there, so that we can do ML on Loki logs and start to look at analysis on the back of that. And actually, we're currently, even right now, rolling that out across production, and bringing that data in from Loki, from Prometheus, from CloudWatch, and trying to consolidate that down into a service-centric view, I think is the right way to phrase that. To say, okay, we've got this service in this region, how is it performing? And bring that data, into one place so that you can health score that service based on those observability metrics.
That's really interesting, because I mean, I think I like the terminology, by the way, of that service-centric view, because ultimately, most software these days is made up from multiple services, and having that kind of service-centric view is really useful. I think for the engineering teams, and how is that kind of getting communicated back, and really, is it driving good behavior? And when I say good behavior, what I mean is like the right behavior in terms of responding to those service level indicators that are telling them that there's a problem. Are they actually, is it driving a more proactive approach to the service management?
I'd say we're on a journey. That would be my phrase there.
Yeah.
The SRE teams are tending to front that at the moment, and triage that and play that out. But we're definitely on a journey. I feel with things like Slack and that, you talk about communication or communicating to teams, and this is why I'm trying to build, like I say, this service-centric view. We're also going through a scaled agile transformation. So, looking at that, looking at how we're organizing teams, and then teams against services. And so I hope, exactly as you suggested there, that the teams will then gravitate towards their services and keep them healthy. I guess this is more the pets versus cattle scenario. It's the other way around. Yes. Now. This is treat them like pets, is look after them, make sure they're groomed and fed and watered and healthy, and running as they should be. Of course, with the aid of some of the central SRE teams who are providing the platform capability to make sure that the metrics and the data are flowing to them, and giving them guidance on the SLOs, SLIs, or whether that's user monitoring metrics, etc., feeding that in so that the teams can understand how their service is performing. Like I say, we're still on a journey there at this point to try and get that data into the team's hands. I still think it's was distributed, and so they're only just going to begin to come to terms with, actually, I've got the data now, I can actually make decisions, and so I think that's where we are at the moment, is going through that initial phase of bringing the data together before we go out to the teams and communicate it to them. And I want them to focus on it. I think Slack's like an open plan office, right? There's just so much noise and things happening there. You've just got all that noise crossing over often. So it's really trying to focus in on what those particular teams care about and make sure that data gets to that given team.
Yeah, I have to say, I love that description of Slack as an open plan office. That's one of my favorite descriptions I've heard for Slack ever. I love it. Anyway, sorry, got distracted by that for a second. So, I mean, that's quite an intricate part of the journey, it feels like, because that kind of realignment of the teams and everything, and getting the information to them at the right time. And it's funny because it's a phrase that I picked up from Harness that I used to use in my previous role, and I still use it now, which is, it's not necessarily about shifting all the work left, it's about shifting the information left so that they have the right information at the right time to be able to take the right action and do that in the right context, right? It's all about, it's not necessarily about shifting knowledge, but it is about shifting that information into the right place at the right time. And I do love that kind of focus on that you're talking about there, about really, allowing the teams to really own the things that they build, and actually be able to care for them and understand how they're running, and the collaboration between the platform and the services and how that works. I think I mean, you have exciting times still. It's not like all the work's done, for sure.
It's definitely not done. It's definitely not done. No, like I say, having the Plough platform there is great because we've got all this at our fingertips now, but it's now, as you say, pulling that all together. And I think you're absolutely right when you say about if you give people the right information early enough, they do tend to make good decisions. Ironically, that's very much part of the platform that we make as a product. Intelliflo, getting information and advice to people to do the right things. I think that's true across the board, any industry, right? You get that information in their hand, they will make a better decision. Let's put it that way. They will make a better decision and an informed decision.
Yeah, no, I think that's critical, and it's critical to getting a good software lifecycle in place. So, we've kind of covered what you've done, where you are now. So how about, the kind of things that that you, Intelliflo, are looking to adopt in the future? How are you planning to continue to evolve your software delivery, to take that journey that you're on now? Where does that go in the future? What are the things that you're really looking to do?
So the big thing next is, like I said, we've got the reliability module there. We're bringing in, this observability data. We've deployed Loki now. We've got Prometheus metrics. Bringing that all together, but we still got to make sure that, as we've just touched on there, that actually gets in the hands of the engineering teams, developers, people to make the decisions. And to me, the answer now is going to be a developer portal, developer hub, whatever term you like it, that's the next logical step. The architecture team did reach out to me, it will be well over a year ago, and did start to touch on Backstage at that time, which was obviously built by Spotify, and most people are aware of. They built it internally for their own use case originally, but they've open sourced it. So, when I looked at it though, again, like you flinched earlier when I said Jenkins, it felt like that. It felt like, all these plugins, not great, necessarily RBAC controls on it. How is this going to work? How are we going to build this? Where's it going to run? Who's going to maintain it? I had visions of, again, dedicating people to operationally running that. I thought we've just moved away from that. We've got away from that. We've got a SaaS provider that we're using. Yes, we have some open source tools providing the observability data, but they're almost ephemeral. They're just feeding in. And again, fortuitous timing, right? Turns out that you guys at Harness were right then, looking to build out that internal developer portal, with a Backstage engine, behind it. So we began exploring that. And that's definitely, for me, the next part of the journey now. And we're currently building that out, looking at how we can get the data in there, working with the team right now, and bringing those SLI data in, bringing the docs in, bringing the deployment data in, all with that single service-centric view. So when you look at service, you'll have your documentation, you'll know where it's deployed, you can see dependencies in the dependency diagram, and some of the engineers have been working on some really clever little bits and pieces within GitHub to publish data into the YAML files based on endpoint data from the service itself. So building that dependency out automatically. So building that diagram out, just looking through the app settings files, and pulling out what's there and actually helping to build that picture out. So you get an instant diagram essentially inside of the IDP of dependencies, and obviously you can then begin to hop around and understand who your dependencies are and read about them and where they're deployed and where they're functional and where they're healthy. And so to me, that's the next thing that we'll be looking to do, along with another thing I'm pioneering internally is remote development environments. So that's Kubernetes namespaces being connected to from the local IDE and consuming those upstream services in the cloud, versus trying to run everything on a super powered, super hot laptop locally. Shifting those dependencies off and up into the cloud. But I think they're both complementary, because I think you need to understand what services you need in your environment, what its dependencies are, and then you want to go and provision and deploy them. And of course, you really want to do that via a central portal. You want to say, okay, this is what I need. This is what I need to build this service. Well, let me deploy that. These are the stack of services I need, and define those manifests and deploy those out. And so, yeah, that's the next thing that I'm kind of quite excited to see. Pull it all really together. The next stage.
I mean, I'm sitting here and I'm kind of excited for you. I actually can't wait to see it. And I've not seen some of the things that you're talking about there. I hope I do get to see them, because honestly, I'd love to see the dependency map. I'd love to see how all of that data is feeding into your service scorecards. I assume, especially with, the fact that you've got the deployment, so that all of that feeds into that kind of what's the health of this service, especially with the SLIs and the SLOs, the frequency of deployment, how fresh the code is, what's the state of the dependencies. I mean, that is if you're a consumer of a service, it gives you confidence in consuming that service. So, when your internal teams are saying, there's a service here that does that, and you and I both know development teams like to build. Why would I use something else that somebody else has built when I can build it again myself? And but I think it helps build that internal trust between the teams, right? They can see that the teams care about their own services just as much as they care about their own, if you see what I mean. And there's a trust then in using those services and getting the reuse and getting the platform consumption.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. And it doesn't just what's great about something like Backseat, it doesn't just stop at services. It's actual components as well, whether they're platform versions, things like everything can be published out and laid out in one place. And you can still link to Confluence and other documentation repositories. But I always feel at the moment it's just dispersed. You're not sure whether you're looking in Confluence or you're looking in Git, and the two don't really meet. Whereas at least you put it in one central place, you can search across both. There's that capability, which is great, or you can at least link off to the Confluence documentation. And I think because you're managing it in Git, there is this, it's accurate because it's in master generally, or thereof, a branch, main, if you will, but it's there, and when it's changed, you've got a full audit trail of that change that's really transparent. When was that changed? And often it may be changed because of a dependency change in the service or a functional change that happened. And so you can tie the two together, I think, easier, and understand that relationship.
I
think that's
good. I love that you're using Git to do that, to track that, because you're getting the full auditability and one source of truth, which is always the problem with that kind of thing in general, right? You want one place to go to get all that information. So I think that's genuinely quite exciting. It is. I really do want to come see that. You're going to have to, the other thing I'm particularly enjoying, we had, you and I both happened to be at a dinner last week, and we were discussing internal developer portals. And the thing that really shocked me to a degree at that particular conversation, and there's a lot of smart people around that table, was this kind of initial view that an internal developer portal was just a hub for documentation, and and kind of expanding that conversation to say it's so much more. And in fact, if it's just a hub for documentation, I feel like you haven't gone down the journey yet to really drive all that service information, that provisioning and self-service and all the rest of it that comes along with that. I think that tied with what you're talking about with provisioning, actual ephemeral developer environments to reduce that load off the laptop. I know my previous role that, ironically, you mentioned the architects team. The architects team had this vision that one day people would be able to use like a Chromebook or a iPad or whatever, because actually everything was ephemeral and they just needed to be able to write some code and commit it, and they would have everything they needed there to test it. That was their vision. They were like, the company could save thousands and thousands and thousands on laptops and everything else, as well as the governance of those. So I think, the stuff you're looking at going forwards is incredibly exciting. And kind of that delivery is and it's going to be exciting. So what do you think your timelines are around those kind of things? When I know there's done, but there's not done, because and your journey tells me this already, right? Because I know that you're kind of partway through one, then you're pioneering the next stage. And I know you're hands full, but I have this vision that at some point, probably in 6 months' time, you're going to be going, so next.
There will be something next. I'm hoping throughout this year to complete that journey of the onboarding of the IDP and get that adoption. We've got some internal team changes that are occurring in regions and things. So, you know, in terms of the alignment of teams. So I'm hoping through that organically, we're going to get people adopting this. And as you touch on there, we want this to be just more than a documentation hub. So this will have service provisioning in there as well. So as the teams are then building new services, they'll be used to interacting with the pool, used to interacting with CD type pipelines. And so then if they then want to deploy something to their remote environment, that's looks exactly the same. You know, they're using it all looks very familiar to them. So we're being fairly aggressive with what I'd like to do, but we're gonna push hard on rolling some of this out through the course of this year, at least from the development tooling side, the DevOps side. You know, that we'll have the capability there. We'll make it available to the teams, and obviously there is always that trade-off with product of us trying to onboard these types of tools and making sure that we don't slow down the delivery process, you know, during that onboarding journey. I don't think we will, to be honest. I think these tools are all complementary. These are going to be able to run underneath, and then, you know, just gradually grow that adoption and track some of that adoption. And I'm very interested to see how this then is reflected in our DORA metrics. So, another module we're using is the engineering insights. We're using that at the moment, really to aid Scrum Masters right now. So we're taking the view of sort of walk, don't run with those types of metrics. Be careful what you use and run the due diligence over them and make sure you're using them accurately and they are reflecting the data accurately. And so that's where they are at the moment, very much looking at the Scrum side of things, and that kind of process. But obviously, there's a lot more in there. We've got lots more data coming in from Harness and GitHub. So, you know, trying to bring that together as well and see, okay, then retrospectively, can we see any changes in those metrics as we onboard these tools? As we roll out this tooling, what did that do to the needle? You know, where did that go? Did it go in the right direction? You know, are we seeing less defects, for an example, but a higher change rate when we roll out a tool like this? So, you know, it's going to be interesting to see as we give this to teams how it changes maybe some of those characteristics, and whether that some of those mean times are affected because of that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to talk about that, because I know you are incredibly passionate about about metrics and data. So, you know, it's good to hear that you're planning how to measure success, which I think, you know, we haven't talked about it that much through this, but, you know, I know you like to collect the metrics, but you like to collect the metrics so you can know if you're being successful and you're driving the right behaviors, right?
Yeah.
And that kind of use of the, you know, the Scrum metrics, for example, and the DORA metrics within SEI is a great way for teams to, if you like, self-medicate around their processes, and you know, and improve and deliver faster, and hopefully, you know, being able to have the visibility to track these kind of things is key, it feels like to me.
Yeah, and we definitely get more oversight of those metrics, even on the delivery side, the continuous delivery side. I'm able to see, you know, trends that were driving down pipeline failures into very low single digits, which is what I want to see, that you know, the pipelines are running time and time again successfully. Sure, we're going to have ones that fail, but it's understanding, okay, was this a tooling failure, or was this a service failure? You know, making sure we clearly understand what the dependency break was, and then maybe including a check so that that doesn't occur again in the future, that a service doesn't get to that point where it's mid deployment and says, oh, this dependency is missing. You know, we don't want that. We want to catch that early, not while we're busy doing a deployment. So, you know, making sure even more that we're looking at those checks and feeding back from those pipelines that are failing, you know, what's occurring. And anyone who's used NextGen will see that nice little dashboard that you get of the overview, especially if you've split your projects up. We've got production as its own project in there, and it just gives you those metrics straight away. Even you can see, which services are encountering, more failures than others, and you can begin to target in on those and say, okay, let's have a look at this service, and then hopefully as we build out this back end with the portal and everything else, we'll be able to say, well, actually, what we can see has changed here is X, and we can see some characteristics of why this may be happening, and address those early.
Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense, and it loops back to what we were saying earlier, which is right information in the right place at the right time with the right context. Because data on its own is not it's helpful, but not as helpful as it is when you've got it in the right context and understand what it means. So
absolutely.
I love that. So so I feel like we've been a full way around the journey. However, I can see a couple of questions in there. So one of the questions was, we've kind of heard you talking about modules a few times. And when you refer to modules, it's what do you mean by modules or modular approach? And kind of what is that and how does it help?
We said this earlier, buzzword bingo, right? So obviously,
buzzword bingo, yeah.
So we use modules in Terraform, probably like a lot of people do. We do have modules in Terraform, but often when I've referred to it in this conversation, I'm talking about modules within Harness. So I'm talking about specific software capability areas within Harness. So the modules of continuous delivery or reliability management or the developer portal. So those are the modules. But I don't think that they're not, even in concept, they're not that dissimilar to a Terraform module. They offer a broad set of functionality you can consume from and you can configure in the way you see fit, within a guardrail or a boundary.
Yeah. So, and actually, I'm going to ask a follow-on question on the back of that because what you have is you don't have a huge set of tools. What I mean by that, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but what you do have is a set of tightly integrated tools that build out your platform, from the GitHub and the Grafana, and obviously CloudWatch is probably in there, given that you're AWS, and obviously the Harness platform and its modules, and you've got all those things tightly integrated together. But do you feel like having that kind of set of platform and those tightly integrated tools gives you advantages, in terms of how you roll that out and implement things?
I think so. I think, as you just touched on there, you can go very broad in your tool set, but what ends up often happening is you end up using a very small percentage of the tools. Even today, we were having this conversation recently with some of the DevOps engineers, and they were looking at GitHub and an assessment we did via Pluralsight. But some of the features that we just don't touch day to day. We just don't touch day to day. So these products have huge feature sets often, and we don't touch every area. So I think as you go broader on the products, you just narrow that in. So I think keeping that fairly tight, you're able to utilize more of a smaller set of products versus a very small percentage of a larger suite. That's kind of my feeling on that. And as you say, integration is key. So we want these to play well together. They need to work like the dynamic of a team, right? We have different players in the team. Some are louder than others. Some of them more showy, but they need to all collaborate well. And I think that's what you're looking for, is that harmony within your product suite.
Yeah. So it's funny you were just talking about teams, because we literally just had a question about teams, which I'll actually pop that up. So curious, interested in the team makeup.
Sure.
Can you elaborate on how it is and what's your strategy?
So my particular, obviously, I'm in charge of the DevOps team. So we have focus teams within site reliability, cloud engineering, database administration. So that's my core disciplines within my group. The wider development org is currently ongoing some changes We're moving away from some third-party development into in-house development, so that's ongoing at the moment. So there is a partnership there where we're trying to bring in more in-house developers, and so we're onboarding there at present, and that's occurring at the moment. So that's kind of how the org is growing, and I think that's very organic, especially of an org of our size. We still have we still have great third parties working with us, but yeah, we're trying to grow that internal development pool.
So that makes me want to loop back to the developer portal. It's not random, but I know that one of the common use cases we come across with developer portal is that kind of easing that onboarding journey for new engineers. Is that something you guys are looking to as well?
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly it. So as I say, as we're growing that pool of developers, and be that internal or external, partners, etc. You want that journey to be as efficient as possible. So yeah, that's certainly some of the aims of bringing this in. We hope will aid us in that journey of onboarding these new teams and individuals.
Awesome, thank you. Well, I think we've been chatting for a while, and as I've said before, I think Mark and I could chat for a very long time, but I think we're pretty much at the end now, and we've I think unless there's a very quick question that came in, I personally just want to give a huge thank you to Mark for spending the time with us today, for sharing his experience and the incredible journey they've taken at Intelliflo. And Harness are happy to have been part of it. But I think the work they're doing there is amazing, and it's been a fabulous journey. And I hope I hope it continues to be so in the future.
Thanks, Martin. I just wanted to touch on that as well. Obviously, I've talked a lot about what we've done. None of it would be possible without the brilliant teams that we have internally, the engineers, the developers, the DevOps engineers, the SREs, the architects. So I also just want to just touch on that and make sure that we give credit where it's due. None of this journey would have been possible without many talented individuals working collaboratively together.
Awesome. I think there's nothing better than sharing the gratitude and the success. So thank you very much indeed. I think with that, I will hand back to Cody to just wrap everything up for the session today.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Martin. And Mark, thank you so much for joining us today as well. It was such an honor to hear how Intelliflo has been putting things together, and to hear success story is always nice. So thank you both for joining us today.
Thanks, Cody.
Thank you.
So before I release our audience, a couple of final reminders. Today's session was recorded, and we'll be sending you the recording via email here shortly as soon as we possibly can. But you can also find the recording living on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars. I will be contacting 2 of our most engaged attendees to win a $50 Amazon gift card. So thank you for your chats and your questions. And if you'd still like to become eligible, there is the webinar survey that is pinned at the top of the chat, as well as in the handouts. Mark, Martin, thank you both once again. I'd like to thank Harness, and my final thanks goes to our audience for being here for the duration of our program today. We hope to see you at a future Techstrong learning experience, and you may now disconnect. Thanks again, everyone.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you.